The champagne glass slipped from Victoria's fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the penthouse terrace as the cruel laughter echoed from the bedroom below. Through the open French doors, she could hear the woman's voice, sharp, vindictive, dripping with satisfaction. "You're the biggest cuckold I know," the voice mocked, followed by her husband's low chuckle. "She has no idea, does she? Poor little Victoria playing the perfect wife while you're here with me every Tuesday and Thursday." Victoria's breath caught in her throat. Tuesday and Thursday, the nights Julian claimed he was working late at the firm. The nights she'd prepared his favorite meals only to eat alone. The nights she'd waited up, worried about his stress levels, his health, his happiness. "She actually thanked me last week for taking such good care of you at the office," the woman continued, her laughter sharp as broken glass. "If only she knew what kind of care I've been giving you on her Egyptian cotton sheets." The world tilted. Those were her sheets, her bedroom, her marriage bed. Victoria pressed herself against the stone wall, her heart hammering so violently she was certain they would hear it 3 floors below. The London skyline blurred through her tears as the magnitude of the betrayal crashed over her like a tsunami. But beneath the devastation, something else began to stir. Something dangerous and electric that would change everything in the next 24 hours, because tomorrow they would discover that Victoria Sterling was nobody's fool. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Sterling penthouse in Mayfair, casting geometric shadows across the Italian marble floors. Victoria had built this sanctuary herself. Every architectural detail, every piece of art, every carefully curated element reflected her impeccable taste and the fortune she'd accumulated through her luxury event planning empire. She stood in her walk-in closet, methodically selecting her armor for the day. Not the silk blouses and understated jewelry she typically favored, but something that commanded attention. Something that reminded the world and herself exactly who she was. The black Armani blazer felt like power incarnate as she slipped it over her shoulders. The Louboutin heels clicked against the marble with military precision. Her grandmother's pearl earrings, the ones that had witnessed 3 generations of strong women, settled against her neck like talismans of unbreakable strength. Victoria Sterling wasn't just another wealthy wife. She was the woman who had planned the royal wedding reception that made international headlines, the woman who had turned a small event planning business into a multi-million-pound empire, the woman who had personally negotiated contracts with heads of state, celebrities, and titans of industry. She had simply forgotten this truth somewhere along the way, lost in the comfortable illusion of her perfect marriage. The reflection staring back at her from the mirror revealed a woman of 32 who had spent the last 3 years dimming her own light to make someone else feel brighter. Her auburn hair had grown longer because Julian preferred it that way. Her makeup had become more subtle because he claimed bold colors were desperate. Her confidence had been slowly, methodically eroded by a man who smiled while he undermined her. The woman's voice from last night echoed in her mind. Poor little Victoria. Poor little... Victoria almost laughed at the absurdity. The woman clearly had no idea she was speaking about someone who owned 3 properties in London alone, who had a personal net worth that exceeded most small countries' GDP, who could destroy reputations with a single phone call. Her phone buzzed against the marble countertop. A text from Julian. "Working late again tonight, darling. Don't wait up. Big case breaking tomorrow." She stared at the message, noting the subtle condescension in his tone. When had darling become a diminutive rather than an endearment? When had his texts started sounding like instructions rather than communications between equals? The answer was simple. From the very beginning, she had been so infatuated with his charm, his Oxford education, his family's minor aristocratic connections, that she had missed the calculation behind his courtship. Victoria walked to her home office, a space that commanded a view of Hyde Park and contained the nerve center of her business empire. The walls were lined with photographs of events that had shaped London society, charity galas that had raised millions, corporate celebrations that had sealed billion-pound deals, intimate dinner parties that had influenced government policy. Every single event had been her creation, her vision, her execution. Yet somehow, in the comfortable domesticity of marriage, she had allowed herself to be reduced to Julian's wife, rather than Victoria Sterling, the most sought-after event planner in Europe. Her laptop chimed with incoming emails, Lady Harrington confirming details for the weekend's charity gala, the French ambassador's wife requesting a consultation for their anniversary celebration, a Hollywood producer wanting her to coordinate a London premiere that would rival Cannes. These people didn't contact her because of her husband's connections. They contacted her because she was legendary in her own right. Another text arrived from her assistant. Lady Harrington wants to confirm the guest list for Saturday's charity gala. Also, that new intern from your husband's firm called again, asking about catering arrangements. She seems very persistent. The intern. Victoria's fingers stilled over the phone. She had met her once, Bianca Montgomery, barely 25, with calculating eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. The woman who had thanked Victoria for taking such good care of Julian. The same woman whose voice had mocked her through the bedroom walls. The memory of their first meeting crystallized with brutal clarity. It had been at Julian's firm Christmas party, an event Victoria had organized as a favor to support his career. Bianca had approached her with effusive compliments about the decorations, the menu, the overall ambiance. "You're so lucky to have such a talented wife," Bianca had said to Julian, her hand resting just a moment too long on his arm. "She makes everything look so effortless." Julian had smiled indulgently, as if Victoria were a particularly clever child showing off her artwork. "She does have her little hobbies," he'd replied. Little hobbies? Her multi-million-pound empire reduced to a recreational activity, and Bianca had laughed, a sound that Victoria now recognized as the same cruel music she'd heard the night before. For a moment, the betrayal threatened to overwhelm her again. The careful life she'd built, the trust she'd invested, the future she'd envisioned, all of it crumbling under the weight of their deception. But Victoria had learned long ago that emotion without action was worthless. She had built her empire by channeling feelings into strategy, pain into power. Every corporate takeover she'd witnessed, every hostile business negotiation she'd navigated had taught her that victory belonged to those who could think clearly under pressure. She opened her laptop and began typing. Within minutes, she had accessed her company's client database, cross-referenced social media accounts, and pulled up financial records that would make a forensic accountant weep with admiration. Bianca Montgomery, it turned out, had quite an interesting digital footprint. The young woman had expensive tastes. Hermes handbags, Saint Laurent shoes, weekend trips to Monaco that she documented obsessively on Instagram. Her lifestyle far exceeded her intern's salary, which Victoria could easily verify through her connections in the legal industry. In fact, according to the credit reports Victoria's contacts could access through perfectly legal channels, Bianca's spending had increased dramatically over the past 6 months. Designer purchases, luxury hotel stays, restaurant bills that would bankrupt most people her age, exactly when Julian had started working late. The pattern was so obvious that Victoria felt foolish for missing it. But then again, she had been busy running an empire while trusting her husband to manage his own affairs with integrity. Her phone rang, interrupting her research. Penelope calling from her art gallery in Chelsea. "Darling, you missed our lunch yesterday. Everything all right? You sounded strange when we spoke." Penelope Davenport had been Victoria's closest friend since university. Where Victoria had chosen the pragmatic path of building a business, Penelope had followed her artistic passion, establishing herself as one of London's most influential gallery owners. She had an uncanny ability to sense when something was wrong. "Actually, Penelope, I need a favor. Remember that journalist friend of yours at the Evening Standard? The one who specializes in society scandals?" "Scarlett? Of course, she's absolutely ruthless when she catches wind of a good story." "Why?" Victoria's reflection gazed back at her from the laptop screen, poised, elegant, and absolutely lethal. "Because I have a story that's going to be front-page news." "Victoria, what's happened? You're scaring me." For the first time since hearing those cruel words, Victoria felt a smile cross her face. Not the polite, accommodating smile she'd perfected for social events, but something sharper, more dangerous. "Nothing's happened, darling. But something is about to happen, and when it does, London society will never look at power the same way again." After hanging up, Victoria sat in her office chair, the same chair from which she had orchestrated some of the most sophisticated events in modern British history, and felt the familiar thrill of a campaign about to begin. Julian and Bianca thought they were playing chess with a novice. They had no idea they were facing a grandmaster who had been playing this game longer than they'd been adults. The first phase of her counterattack would begin within the hour. The revelation should have destroyed her. Instead, Victoria found herself operating with a precision that would have impressed military strategists. She had spent the morning confirming what she already knew, but now she needed evidence that would hold up in court, and she needed to understand exactly how long this had been going on. The Jaguar purred through London's morning traffic as Victoria navigated toward the Sterling and Associates law firm. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was driving a car purchased with her own money to visit a business she had financially backed to investigate a husband who was betraying her with funds she had provided. The city moved around her in its familiar rhythm. Black cabs weaving between buses, business people hurrying along sidewalks, the eternal dance of commerce and power that had made London a global capital. She had always loved this energy, the sense of being at the center of something significant. Today she felt like a predator moving through urban prey. Her first stop was the Sterling and Associates law firm, the practice she had financially backed when Julian graduated from Oxford. The practice that bore her family name because her inheritance had purchased the Mayfair offices, hired the staff, and established their reputation among London's elite. The building stood like a monument to understated wealth. Georgian architecture with modern security, brass plaques that gleamed under the morning sun, the kind of professional presence that inspired confidence in wealthy clients. Victoria had personally selected every detail during the renovation, from the marble lobby to the mahogany conference rooms. Walking through the glass doors felt different now. Every surface, every piece of furniture, every carefully selected artwork represented her investment in a man who had repaid her trust with systematic humiliation. "Mrs. Sterling," the receptionist beamed. Sarah, a pleasant woman in her 50s, who had always treated Victoria with genuine warmth. "Mr. Sterling is in court this afternoon, but I can take a message." "Actually, I'm here about the charity gala arrangements. I need to coordinate some final details with your staff, particularly regarding the catering liaison. I believe you have an intern who's been handling that communication." "Oh, Bianca." Sarah's expression shifted slightly, a micro-expression that Victoria's trained eye caught immediately. "She's not here today. Called in sick again, actually." "Again?" "Well," Sarah glanced around, then lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Between you and me, she's been calling in sick quite frequently lately. Mr. Sterling has been covering her client meetings personally. Very dedicated of him, really, but it does seem unusual." Of course, he had. Victoria filed away this information while maintaining her pleasant facade. That's very concerning. Perhaps you could help me access the catering correspondence. I want to make sure nothing has fallen through the cracks. Certainly. Let me pull up the files. What Victoria discovered in the next 20 minutes would have been admissible in any court of law. Julian had given Bianca access to client files that were supposed to be confidential. He had approved expense reports for client entertainment that coincidentally matched the dates of luxury purchases appearing on Bianca's social media. More damning, he had listed her as an authorized contact on several major accounts, giving her signature authority on expenses that should have required senior partner approval. I noticed some unusual charge patterns, Victoria observed, scrolling through the digital records. These restaurant expenses seem quite high for client meetings. Sarah leaned closer to the screen, her expression growing troubled. You know, I've wondered about that myself. Some of these places are, well, they're more romantic dinner spots than business venues. The Ivy, Le Bernardin, that new place in Covent Garden with the private dining rooms. Each name was a knife twist. Victoria had suggested Le Bernardin for their anniversary dinner last year, only for Julian to claim it was too pretentious for his taste. Apparently, it was perfect for entertaining his mistress on the company account. And these hotel charges? Oh, those are for out-of-town client meetings. Edinburgh, Bath, that sort of thing. Though... Sarah paused, clearly uncomfortable. Though what? Well, the hotel in Bath charged us for 2 rooms, but only one was actually used. I queried it with Mr. Sterling, and he said it was a booking error they couldn't cancel, but it happened twice. Victoria nodded gravely while internally cataloging every detail. 2 rooms booked, 1 used. The oldest trick in the adultery handbook. Maintain plausible deniability while creating a paper trail that suggested propriety. By noon, she had copies of everything. Her private investigator, Dominic Vance, the same man she used to vet potential business partners and investigate corporate espionage, had already begun building a comprehensive file. Dominic was a former Scotland Yard detective who had transitioned to private investigation after retirement. His specialty was financial crime, and his reputation for discretion was legendary among London's elite. Victoria had retained him on a yearly basis since establishing her business, understanding that knowledge was the ultimate currency in her industry. Mrs. Sterling. His voice was gravelly when she called him from the Jaguar. I've got preliminary findings that you need to see. How preliminary? Hotel receipts, restaurant charges, travel expenses, all traced back to firm accounts. But it goes deeper than simple expense account fraud. Victoria's grip tightened on the steering wheel. How much deeper? Your husband has been systematically inflating legal fees charged to your personal accounts, then using the excess to fund his activities. We're talking about tens of thousands of pounds over the past 8 months. The number hit her like a physical blow, not just because of the amount, but because of what it represented. Julian hadn't just stolen from the firm, or even from their joint accounts. He had directly stolen from her personal business earnings. There's more, Dominic continued. The young woman, Bianca Montgomery, has been using firm credit cards for personal purchases, handbags, jewelry, even a weekend trip to Paris that she documented extensively on social media. Your husband authorized every charge. Victoria pulled into a parking space outside their bank, her hands trembling slightly as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. This wasn't just an affair. It was systematic theft, fraud, and professional misconduct that could result in criminal charges. How far back does it go? I'm still investigating, but based on the credit card patterns, Mrs. Sterling, this has been going on for at least 8 months, possibly longer. 8 months. 8 months of intimate dinners at restaurants where Victoria had never been invited. 8 months of weekend trips to Bath, Edinburgh, and Paris that Julian had claimed were solo legal conferences. 8 months of jewelry purchases from Tiffany and Coupler that had never found their way to Victoria's collection. She sat in the leather seats of her car, purchased with money from her thriving business, and felt something shift fundamentally inside her chest. The hurt was still there, the devastating pain of betrayal that made her chest feel hollow. But alongside it grew something else, a cold, calculating fury that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with justice. Her phone buzzed with a text from Julian. "Darling, I've invited a few colleagues for dinner tomorrow night. Could you arrange something spectacular? You know how much I depend on you. Perhaps that lovely salmon dish you made for the Harrison celebration. Everyone always raves about your attention to detail." Victoria read the message 3 times, each word burning itself into her memory. He depended on her. Her money, her connections, her reputation, her skills. But he had repaid that dependence by treating her like a fool, while flaunting his mistress in their shared social circles. The tone was so perfectly patronizing, so casually dismissive, as if she were hired help rather than the woman who had built the fortune that funded his lifestyle. She thought about all the dinner parties she had hosted, all the networking events she had organized, all the ways she had supported his career, while her own empire flourished quietly in the background. She had been the perfect wife, and he had taken that perfection as permission to abuse her trust. The woman yesterday had called her a cuckold, as if she was some pathetic figure deserving of ridicule, rather than a woman who had simply loved her husband enough to trust him. That trust died in that moment, replaced by something far more dangerous, absolute clarity about what needed to happen next. She typed back, "Of course, darling. It will be a dinner party no one will ever forget. I'm planning something truly special, the kind of evening that will be talked about for years to come. But first, she had one more stop to make, and this one would provide the final piece of evidence she needed to destroy them both." The revelation hit Victoria like a physical blow when she walked into Harrods and saw them together. She had gone there to purchase a gift for Lady Harrington's birthday, a small crystal sculpture from the luxury home section that would serve as both a thoughtful gesture and a reminder of her impeccable taste. Instead, she found herself witnessing the most brazen display of her husband's betrayal. Julian stood at the jewelry counter with Bianca pressed against his side, her fingers trailing possessively across his chest as she examined an emerald necklace that cost more than most people's annual salary. The same style of necklace he had bought for Victoria on their first anniversary, except this version was clearly an upgrade. "She'll look stunning in it," Bianca purred, her voice carrying that same mocking tone from the night before. "Much better than your wife ever could. That woman has no appreciation for true luxury." Victoria felt her breath catch. The casual cruelty of the statement was staggering, but it was the dismissive tone that cut deepest, as if she, Victoria Sterling, were some suburban housewife who shopped at department stores rather than the woman who owned vintage pieces from Cartier and Van Cleef & Arpels. Julian laughed, actually laughed, as he handed over his credit card, the card linked to Victoria's accounts. "Victoria thinks expensive jewelry is vulgar. She has no idea what it means to be truly elegant." The lie was so breathtaking in its audacity that Victoria had to grip the edge of a display case to steady herself. She had never said anything of the sort. In fact, she had often admired beautiful jewelry, but Julian had consistently steered her toward more understated pieces whenever she showed interest in anything elaborate. He had been systematically diminishing her confidence while positioning himself as the arbiter of sophistication. "Her taste is so provincial," Bianca continued, examining her reflection in a compact mirror. "All those pearls and simple gold pieces like something my grandmother would wear." The irony was staggering. Bianca was criticizing the very pieces that represented old money, established taste, and generational wealth. Victoria's pearl collection included pieces that had belonged to aristocratic families for centuries, jewelry that couldn't be purchased, but only inherited. But it was Bianca's next words that shattered the last of Victoria's illusions. "When will you finally leave her?" she asked, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a private whisper. "I'm getting tired of sneaking around, and frankly, I'm tired of pretending to respect her when she's so obviously beneath us both." "Soon," Julian murmured, kissing her temple in a gesture that should have belonged to his wife. "The prenup was ironclad, but my lawyer found some loopholes. By next year, I'll be able to claim half of everything she inherited. We just need to be patient a little longer." The world tilted. Victoria gripped the marble counter to steady herself as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. This wasn't just about sex or even emotional connection. This was a calculated plan to steal her inheritance, her family's legacy, the foundation of everything she had built. Julian had never loved her. He had married her for her money, played the devoted husband, while systematically positioning himself to destroy her financially. And Bianca wasn't just his mistress, she was his accomplice in what amounted to the planned theft of Victoria's life's work. "My lawyer says that if I can prove she's been neglecting the marriage, working too much, not being available emotionally, I can make a case for compensation," Julian continued. "All those late nights she spends on her little business ventures will actually work in our favor. Little business ventures." Her empire reduced to a hobby that could be used against her in court. The calculation was breathtaking in its cruelty. Every time she had worked late to build her business, every client dinner she had attended, every moment of professional success had been filed away as evidence for their eventual divorce proceedings. They had been gathering ammunition against her while she unknowingly provided the bullets. "The charity gala tomorrow night will be perfect," Bianca was saying, admiring her new emerald necklace in the mirror. "Everyone who matters will be there to see you finally claim what you deserve. Poor Victoria won't know what hit her." "I've already had my attorney draft the papers," Julian replied. "We'll serve them the morning after the gala when she's still reeling from the public humiliation. By the time she recovers enough to fight back, we'll have already frozen the assets." They were planning to humiliate her publicly at her own event, then strike while she was emotionally devastated, using her own money and connections to destroy her reputation while positioning themselves as the new power couple of London society. The strategic thinking was actually impressive in a sociopathic way. They had identified her strengths, her professional reputation, her social connections, her financial independence, and planned to weaponize them all against her. What they hadn't counted on was that those same strengths would become the tools of their destruction. Victoria stepped back into the shadows, her mind racing with crystalline clarity. They thought they were so clever, so superior. They had no idea they were dealing with a woman who had outmaneuvered billionaires, heads of state, and media moguls. She had built her empire by anticipating every possible move, planning for every contingency, and striking with surgical precision when the moment was right. And tomorrow night, that moment would arrive. But first, she needed to accelerate her timeline. She pulled out her phone and made 5 calls in rapid succession. The first was to her divorce attorney, not the family lawyer Julian knew about, but Catherine Pierce, the woman who handled hostile takeovers and asset protection for her wealthiest clients. Catherine was known in London legal circles as the Iron Lady, and her reputation for destroying opponents in court was legendary. "Catherine, it's Victoria Sterling. I need you to prepare emergency divorce papers for filing tomorrow morning, and I need asset protection measures implemented immediately." The second call was to Dominic Vance, authorizing him to expedite the final evidence gathering regardless of cost. "I need everything by 6 a.m. tomorrow," she told him. "Financial records, hotel receipts, witness statements, digital evidence, everything that will hold up in criminal court." The third call was to Scarlett, Penelope's journalist friend. "Scarlett, it's Victoria Sterling. I have an exclusive for you that will make your career, but I need you to hold the story until exactly 9 p.m. tomorrow night. The fourth call was to her bank, implementing emergency measures to protect her personal accounts from any joint account access. The fifth call was to her head of security, informing him that he would need additional personnel for tomorrow night's event. As she walked out of Harrods, passing the very counter where her husband and his mistress were completing their transaction with her money, Victoria felt the familiar thrill she experienced before closing a major deal. The same focused intensity that had made her legendary in her industry. But this time, she wasn't planning an event for her clients. She was planning the destruction of her enemies. Julian and Bianca had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated exactly who they were trying to destroy, and tomorrow night they would learn the difference between playing games and playing for keeps. The Grosvenor House ballroom had never looked more magnificent. Victoria had outdone herself, transforming the space into a glittering wonderland of crystal chandeliers, cascading orchids, and ambient lighting that made every guest look like royalty. 300 of London's most influential people mingled beneath the soaring ceilings, champagne flowing as freely as the gossip. But tonight wasn't about creating beauty. Tonight was about creating justice. Every detail had been planned with military precision. The security cameras positioned to capture every angle. The sound system capable of broadcasting her voice to every corner of the room. The guest list carefully curated to include not just London's elite, but the media figures who would ensure her story reached every household in Britain by morning. Julian moved through the crowd, like a man who owned the world. Bianca, conspicuously absent, but undoubtedly watching from wherever she was positioned. He wore his most expensive tuxedo, purchased with Victoria's money, and the family cufflinks that had belonged to her father. Even his accessories were stolen from her life. He had no idea that every conversation, every photograph, every moment was being carefully orchestrated by his wife, who stood 20 feet away planning his professional execution. "Darling, you've outdone yourself," he murmured in Victoria's ear as they posed for society photographers. "This will definitely make the papers." "Oh, it certainly will," she replied, her smile never faltering. She wore her grandmother's diamonds tonight, the ones that had belonged to her family for generations, the ones that represented old money, established power, unshakable legacy. Every person in this room knew what those diamonds meant. They represented a lineage that couldn't be bought, borrowed, or stolen. The irony was perfect. While Julian flaunted stolen jewelry on his mistress, Victoria wore the real symbols of power. As the evening progressed, she watched her husband work the room with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. He introduced himself as senior partner of a firm that bore her family name. He spoke about their success as if he had contributed equally to her empire. He accepted compliments on their beautiful home, as if he hadn't planned to steal it from her. The performance was flawless and absolutely damning. Lady Harrington approached, resplendent in vintage Chanel and glittering with sapphires. "Victoria, darling, this is absolutely spectacular. How do you manage to surpass yourself every single time?" "Years of practice," Victoria replied, "and very careful attention to detail." "Your husband must be so proud. Such a power couple you make." Victoria's eyes found Julian across the room, where he was deep in conversation with a group of barristers, no doubt networking for the career he planned to build on her stolen money. "Pride can be a dangerous thing," she said quietly, "especially when it's unearned." At 8:15, she received a text from Dominic Vance. "Package delivered to your office? Everything you requested plus some additional surprises. He's been busy." At 8:20, her divorce attorney sent a simple message. "Papers filed electronically. Asset protection in place. You're bulletproof." At 8:25, Scarlett confirmed. "Story ready to publish on your signal. This is going to be massive." At 8:30, Victoria stepped onto the small stage. The crowd quieted immediately. She commanded attention effortlessly, her presence filling the vast ballroom as she had filled boardrooms and palaces around the world. This was supposed to be her moment to announce the charity's fundraising success, to thank the generous donors, to cement her reputation as London's premier hostess. Instead, she was about to detonate a bomb that would reshape London society. "Friends," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly across the silent ballroom, "thank you for joining me tonight for what will undoubtedly be a memorable evening." Julian beamed from the front row, completely unaware of what was coming. Several camera phones were already recording, exactly as she had anticipated. Before we celebrate our charitable achievements, I want to share some personal news that I believe will interest you all. The energy in the room shifted subtly. This wasn't the script they had expected. As many of you know, my husband and I have been married for 3 wonderful years. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Julian's smile grew wider. "What you don't know is that tomorrow morning I'll be filing for divorce." The silence was deafening. 300 of the most powerful people in London stood frozen, champagne glasses halfway to their lips as the announcement hit like a thunderclap. Julian's face went white. He started moving towards the stage, but Victoria's security team, discreet but efficient, blocked his path. "You see," she continued, her voice never wavering, "I've discovered that marriage, like business, requires honesty to function effectively, and my husband has been anything but honest." The crowd was mesmerized. Camera phones appeared throughout the ballroom as guests realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. "I've learned that he's been conducting an affair with Miss Bianca Montgomery, a young woman from his firm. But this affair hasn't been limited to emotional betrayal." She paused, letting the words sink in. "It has been funded entirely by my family's money, while he systematically planned to steal my inheritance through fraudulent legal maneuvers." Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Someone dropped a champagne glass. The sound of shattering crystal punctuated her words perfectly. "The evidence has been turned over to both the Metropolitan Police for fraud investigation and the Law Society for professional misconduct review. Mr. Sterling's career in law is effectively over." Julian was shouting now, trying to reach her, but security held him firmly in place. His protests only served to confirm her allegations in the minds of everyone present. As for Miss Montgomery, who apparently enjoys mocking women she considers inferior, I should mention that she's been embezzling from the firm's client accounts to fund her lifestyle. The authorities have been notified, and she'll be arrested before morning. The crowd erupted into chaos, but Victoria's voice cut through the noise. "I want you all to witness this moment because it represents something important. What happens when people mistake kindness for weakness?" She gestured to the magnificent ballroom around them. "Everything you see here, this venue, this event, the charity it supports, was built with my money, organized by my company, attended by my clients and friends. My husband's only contribution was spending the profits on his mistress while planning to steal the rest. If you're watching this story and rooting for women who refuse to be victims, show your support by engaging with this content. And if you want more tales of justice and empowerment, there are plenty more stories of strong women coming. I want to thank you all for bearing witness to this moment. Sometimes justice requires an audience." The ballroom erupted into complete chaos. Julian was being escorted from the building by security. As photographers captured every moment of his humiliation, the guests stood in stunned silence, then began talking all at once, the noise building to a crescendo. Social media exploded as videos of her speech went viral within minutes. Sterling Justice began trending before she even left the stage. But Victoria remained calm, serene, untouchable as her world transformed around her. By morning, the story would be international news. By next week, she would be free, and Bianca's cruel laughter from that terrible night would be nothing but a memory, drowned out by the sound of justice being served. As she walked off the stage, Victoria felt lighter than she had in years. The game was over, and she had won. 6 months later, Victoria stood on the terrace of her new penthouse overlooking Hyde Park, watching the sunrise paint the London sky in shades of gold and amber. The space was entirely hers, purchased with her own money, decorated to her own taste, filled with silence that belonged only to her. The morning ritual had become sacred to her. Coffee in her grandmother's china cup, the Financial Times spread across the glass table. Her agenda for the day laid out with military precision, but most importantly, the absolute certainty that every decision she made served only her own interests and values. The transformation had been complete and devastating to her enemies. The divorce proceedings had lasted exactly 6 weeks. Catherine Pierce had systematically demolished every argument Julian's legal team attempted, presenting evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and professional misconduct that left them with no choice but to settle for nothing. The prenup had held perfectly. The asset protection measures had worked flawlessly. Julian walked away with exactly what he had brought to the marriage. Nothing. His law license had been permanently revoked. The criminal charges had resulted in a 2-year prison sentence, though he would likely serve only 18 months with good behavior. The Law Society had published a formal censure that ensured he would never work in the legal profession again. Bianca had fared even worse. The embezzlement charges had been ironclad, supported by digital evidence that Dominic Vance had gathered with forensic precision. Her trial had been swift and brutal, resulting in a 3-year sentence and a restitution order that would keep her in debt for decades. But more devastating than the legal consequences was the social destruction. London society had turned on them both with the viciousness reserved for those who violated the most sacred trust, the sanctity of marriage and the honor of professional ethics. The media coverage had been relentless. Every detail of their affair, every fraudulent expense, every moment of their betrayal had been dissected in the press. Bianca's Instagram account, once filled with luxury and arrogance, had been preserved by journalists as evidence of her stolen lifestyle. The public had been particularly harsh on Julian. Men who betrayed successful women while stealing their money occupied a special category of contempt in modern society. His name had become synonymous with opportunistic betrayal. But Victoria's story had taken on a different dimension entirely. She had become an icon. The video of her gala speech had been viewed millions of times across multiple platforms. Women around the world had claimed her as a symbol of empowerment, dignity, and the refusal to be victimized. When sterling justice had evolved into a broader movement encouraging women to investigate suspicious behavior and protect their assets. Marriage lawyers reported a surge in prenup consultations. Financial advisors saw increased interest in asset protection strategies. Private investigators experienced unprecedented demand from women seeking to verify their partner's fidelity. Victoria had accidentally started a revolution. Her business had exploded beyond her wildest projections. Event planning clients fought for her services, viewing her as a woman who could handle any crisis with grace and precision. International corporations sought her out specifically because her reputation for strategic thinking had become legendary. She had opened offices in Paris, New York, and Dubai. Her staff had tripled. Her net worth had increased by 40% in 6 months. More importantly, she had rediscovered herself. The woman who had once dimmed her light to avoid threatening her husband's ego had been replaced by someone who understood that true power required no apologies. Her phone buzzed with the morning's first message. A text from Penelope. Lunch today. I have the most delicious gossip about Julian's pathetic attempts to rebuild his reputation from prison. Victoria deleted the message without responding. She had no interest in her ex-husband's struggles. He had become irrelevant to her story the moment she decided to reclaim her power. The red flags had been everywhere. Of course, she could see them clearly now with the benefit of distance and clarity. His increasing emotional distance disguised as work stress. His criticism of her appearance framed as helpful suggestions. His way of making her feel grateful for the smallest gestures of affection while taking her massive contributions for granted. He had systematically undermined her confidence while positioning himself to steal everything she had worked for. The strategy had been sophisticated and might have worked against someone who hadn't spent decades outmaneuvering powerful opponents in boardrooms around the world. But she had been so invested in being the perfect wife that she had ignored her own instincts. Never again. Her assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Sterling, your 10-hour appointment is here. The Duchess of Marlborough wants to discuss her daughter's wedding. Also, you have 3 interview requests from Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and Town & Country. They want to feature you in their Power Women issues." Victoria straightened her shoulders and walked toward her office, every step carrying the confidence of a woman who had emerged from betrayal stronger than ever. The magazines wanted to write about her because she represented something that powerful women recognized: the absolute refusal to accept less than what she deserved. She had learned that forgiveness was optional, but self-respect was not negotiable. Some women forgive. Some women forget. But the smart ones never give someone the chance to betray them twice. The woman who had once mocked her was serving time in Holloway Prison, her reputation destroyed, her future mortgaged to pay for her crimes. Justice, Victoria had discovered, was best served with absolute precision, and she was very, very good at being precise. Her empire continued to grow, built on a foundation that no one could steal because it came from within. The unshakable knowledge that she was nobody's victim, nobody's fool, and nobody's second choice. The morning that had started with cruel laughter and humiliation had led her to this moment, standing in her own space, commanding her own destiny, answering to no one but herself. And if anyone dared to underestimate her again, they would learn what happened when they confused kindness with weakness. Because Victoria Sterling had forgotten how to be anyone's victim, she had remembered instead how to be a queen.